Denise.
Thank you for having me.
Do you need a microphone?
No, I'm all good. Thank you for having me. Be forewarned that I'm not that scary. It's really interesting when I say to people I've worked in this space for in excess of 20 years, I look at myself and go, oh my God, that seems so long ago. But things have substantially changed. And as an advocate, it used to be about housing, accommodation, education issues, and yes, they are important issues and they are relevant issues. However, there is an issue that still gets forgotten about today and is still seen as a taboo issue today, and that is the topic of sexuality and sexual expression. But I will argue that to actually achieve sexuality and sexual expression, you actually have to achieve social ability. And this sometimes lacks for people with disability because we can look somewhat scary to people. But I've just finished a PhD research which I submitted 31 days ago today, and it still haunts me today. Looking at sexuality, sexual expression of women with physical disability. And the one thing they tell me is that they wanted information. They wanted information that is relatable and that is reflective of them as women. And I asked some of my male counterparts, and they actually said, your research is transferable to us. It's just nobody's ever asked us. So the same things occur for men with physical disability as they do with women with disability. But ironically enough, women are less asked about their sexuality than men, because the males in this space would be more overt than the women in this space. And one of the biggest arguments that I had around research and this topic is when you actually talk about sexuality and sexual expression, it always has to start from a heteronormative perspective, which can be exclusionary for people with disability, particularly those with physical disability, in that a lot of people will actually say, we're already different, so sexual diversity is just an extension of that. Therefore, we need to be considerate of diversity and sexual experimentation in a safe space, but the only way to do that is by having information available. And that can be found through organisations like Family Planning New South Wales and their equivalent counterparts in every state and territory. But what I found was, in my research, women and men are both resourceful when it comes to sexuality and sexual expression, and they will find information on the internet. And for those of you who are scared of the internet and think, oh God, that can lead to misconceptions, think about the fact that no resources in sexuality education reflect disability. They come from a very biological perspective. They come from a very functional perspective. They come from a very ableist perspective. And we as people with disability, and yes, I do have one, even though I don't choose to say it all the time, yes, I do have one. But we do have to ask for it. And, you know, the part of my job that I've enjoyed the most is planning sex work appointments for people with disability, because it involved pleasure. It involved pleasure. Whereas other areas of my work involved arguing with people for very basic things. Sex work can be an outlet for people with disabilities so that they know what their bodies are capable of. But they also pursue relationships. And it's very funny when I say that sex work can be an outlet for people with disability. If my partner was here today, he'd go, okay, Denise, but that's not the only thing that matters. And yes, people with disability do have relationships, but they need to be given the space to create those relationships. They need to know that there are people like them, and representation is key to this discussion. And when I talk about sexuality and sexual expression, people think I'm going to break out some dummy and give you the biological discussion. But when I actually talk about it, I only talk about it from the perspective of a social perspective, because it is an extension of social expression. It is not anything other than that. But what I actually would like to see organisations do is have panels where they have people who are willing to speak about their lived experience, so other people can say, oh my goodness, this is possible for me. Because when I interviewed 19 women, that's what they wanted to hear and see. And that's why the internet can be relatable to people, because it is real people. And I've actually put up on the back here an exhibition called Intimate Encounters. And I was a participant in this exhibition. It's now 23 years old. Intimate Encounters looks at disability, sexuality and body image. The little devil is Carolyn Bowditch, who I'm sure some of you know, because Carolyn has OI. And she was the little devil, and she still is, because she actually pursued a sexual life in spite of, people saying it wasn't possible or it was all too hard. She got married, she had relationships. People do it in spite of misconceptions and stereotypes. So my argument is that we have to actually provide people information so that they can actually be safe in it. Because when I talk about sexuality, sexual expression, you do have to talk about violence. But information is power. Knowing what your body is capable of and knowing what you want to do as part of your sexual expression. And for a lot of people, it is just the intimate connection. The intimate connection is the beginning of everything. But people see it as it has to be this. Television media irritates me no end, because it's not reflective of real bodies. It's not reflective of real experience. When I interviewed 19 women, they actually showed me photos of their children's feet, because they were reflective of kids that they'd had. When other women showed me clothes that they wanted to wear, but they weren't confident enough because they'd been fed messages about what the media would say if a body like theirs was in those clothes. And one woman that I interviewed actually had OI, and she said to me, nobody would see me as a sexual being if I did not go out and look for it and connect with people. Because people with disability are asexualized. So there has to be a point where we acknowledge that people with disability are going to have sexual lives in spite of, and maybe because of, their disability. But representation is key. So at your next conferences, I propose that you actually have a panel where you talk about your own experiences so other people can learn from those. Because I know it's confronting, isn't it? That proposal. But you see, people want to see people like them. They want to see relatability. And that is the biggest message that I have. People want to see connectivity. And events like this do that. But please do not have a panel that is very heteronormative, because then you've learnt nothing from me. And if you learn something, diversity is fine, information is power. And if you give people information that is relatable, they are less likely to take unreasonable and unsafe risks. And this is the thing that we have to remember as professionals. As I stand here today, and as I stand here, and I was talking to the Department of Education on Friday about saying, your sex education is not inclusive of people with disability or representative. And they said, but we don't know how to do it and why. They can get it from sexual health services. Sexuality discussions is everybody's responsibility. Because I will never forget one of my participants with a woman with physical disability who acquired her disability. She said to me, sexuality could be writing something. It could be a penis-shaped cake. But she used another word that I'm not going to use. But the thing that she told me was, when she wasn't given information, it was because people thought it was irrelevant to her. And every one of my participants talked about information not being provided because people thought we had bigger things to worry about.
Denise, can I make a comment just while you're on that? I know when I was 18 and went to the GP and I asked about contraceptive pills.
You would have been told what the fuck for.
She actually apologised to me.
Oh, did she?
Yes. And she said, I'm so sorry, because any other 18-year-old girl that came in, that's what I probably would have had a discussion 2 years ago.
Yeah.
She said, but because you've always got such big issues.
I love the word issues in social, in advocacy.
She never thought to have that sex talk with me.
See, this is the thing.
So it goes back to even educating doctors to what we say about asexual, for them to think of us as sexual beings. Because
there's automatically a desexualization that happens. And that asexualization is an actual sexual orientation. But desexualization is when you're actually assumed to not be sexual because of the presence of disability. And this is the problem. If you do that, you automatically take away part of our identities. And part of our identities are already challenged by the presence of disability. Because it's not easy being a person with disability. Sorry, it's not. But the fun thing is, when you talk about sex and sexuality, people go, oh, that's hard and scary. I said, but the thing is, if you don't talk about it, you're forgetting part of the pleasure. And the thing is, it may not be the act of sex, but it's intimacy and connection. So people need to actually be open and speak about it, because people want to see relatability. They want to see people like themselves in the discussion. And as another one of my participants said, when you become a parent of a child with disability, you don't get a manual that tells you how to raise that child. You don't get any manual to raise any child. But you particularly don't get a manual to raise a child with disability. Yes, you can buy a book off a shelf to go, this is what you do with children, but it doesn't give you specifics. So if you don't actually speak and you don't see your child and your young adults as whole people, there is potential that you are leaving them more vulnerable to risk and violence, because they will go find the information where they want to, and that actually, where they find it, and that can lead to abuse and violence. And I interviewed 19 women, and every one of the 19 women I interviewed experienced some form of violence. And that's because they told me they did not have information. They did not know, they could not see themselves in it. They could not see themselves in the conversation. And when they spoke about sexuality, it was only done from a functional perspective. Move away from the functional perspective, because the functional perspective automatically excludes people with physical disability, because our bodies function differently. And it may take experimentation, it may take patience, and it may take diversity. But the thing is, if you give someone information and you're open about it, you actually create a safe space for exploration, rather than keeping it behind closed doors and going, oh no, this is not for me, because that is what leads to risk. It was very, very funny, because the women all said to me, in spite of being told I couldn't do this, it wasn't going to be possible, I did it, and I have done it, and I'm happy to share my story because others will learn from it. So the moral of that is, people are willing to tell you about it if you create a safe space. They are willing to talk and share their experiences, as long as a safe space is created and a non-judgmental space is created. It was really interesting to me when working in sexuality and sexual expression as an advocate, because people would say to me often, you know, that's really hard work. People must tell you some really unusual things. And I go, yeah, but it's their thing. It's fine as long as they've got information, power, and they know where how they're making the decision, and they have capacity. Consent and capacity needs to be discussed. But a person with disability can only have consent and capacity with information that is relatable to them, as in they see themselves in it. They see themselves in the information, they see relatability in that information. And talking amongst yourselves is important, because you'll learn from one another. Because every one of my 19 women talked about going on the internet and using websites like Tumblr, yes, I said Tumblr, to find information and talk to people because they wanted to see bodies like theirs. And they couldn't find it in the sex education material that was being pumped out by health organisations, by schools. They had to do their independent research. And for some people, that actually meant having sex. And that meant that they needed a safe space for that to happen. And a lot of people say that if they were given a safe space, that they would have been a lot safer in their exploration. So the thing is, creating a safe space to share knowledge, creating a safe space for that exploration to happen are key things. So the philosophy of having an open conversation is so important. And as Anne Finger talks about, Anne Finger is a woman with cerebral palsy who wrote, our deepest source of oppression is sexuality and sexual expression. It's more easier to talk about transport, accommodation, and actually government support rather than sexuality and sexual expression. My argument is it doesn't need to be that hard because it should be age appropriate, life stage appropriate, and it doesn't need to be about penetrative sex straight off the bat, people. I know that that's where the conversation generally starts, but it shouldn't start from there. It needs to start from the social. People with disability need to be out and representative so that it becomes the norm, because disability is the norm. When we have 17.3% of the population, disability in Australia, disability is the norm. We are the largest minority globally, and if we embrace that power and that representation, and the exhibition that I showed you when I started, that has been shown around the world for 20 years now. And that exhibition is so powerful because it actually shows real bodies, and they are bodies of people with disability. And they are real bodies. And there's another exhibition that was commissioned by Family Planning New South Wales called Outing Disability, which looks at the lives of people with disability who identify as LGBTQIA+. And so these kind of resources are good starting points. Me being a social work academic, and yes, I laugh when I say that every time that I say that, I actually tell social work students about these resources because they're real people. And that's what people want to see. They want to see real people living intimate lives, living the lives that they aspire to have, only if they could see representation of. But doctors, medical professionals, and nurses, and whoever else, and parents have to go some of the way to making it okay for us to talk about it as well. Because the experts, or supposed experts, need to know that we need the information so that we can become our own experts and share that knowledge. So at your next conferences, please consider having a panel of people with disability and actually talking about your experiences. Please do that, and I'll sit up the back and be so proud. Because the thing is, parents able-bodied parents can't tell their child with disability what it's like to be a sexual being as a person with disability. They can give them the rudimentary biological discussion, but you can get that shit from anywhere, let me tell you. But you want to see the conversation of, how does this work? Would this work? Would it cause issues for me? And I've heard you share similarities and experiences as I've walked in this room. Therefore, you already do it. People, don't be scared of sharing this either. So create a safe space so that you can actually have these conversations. Because nobody's going to learn from anybody else if they haven't been there before. And yes, the experience is going to be different for each individual, but you have to start from the basis of information leads to good participation and engagement. And don't be scared of having the conversation about how to start friendships and connections, because that's where all intimate connections, all healthy intimate connections should stem from. And sometimes starting friendships as a person with disability can be extremely difficult. You can scare a lot of able-bodied people. And yes, it is part of our responsibility to be representative and visible. Visibility is key, right? I look around this room and I know some of the people in this room, and I've known some of you for a lot longer than I care to admit, because that would be showing my age. But what I do know is that you are willing to come forward and share information. So why is sexuality and sexual expression any different? So please, at your next conferences, contemplate it. I would expect a married couple in there. I would expect somebody from LGBTQI plus community to be there. And I would expect someone who is single to be there as well, because singledom is okay. You know, there's this whole thing socially, you've got to be in a couple to be a sexual being. It's really funny. Every one of the women that I interviewed talked about clothes as an expression of their sexuality and sexual expression. And I asked male counterparts with physical disability about clothes. And they said, hell yeah, because believe it or not, you get to shift people's minds from your physical disability. They focus on the clothes and the outfit rather than the actual disability. So it is a psychological trick. But even dressing and giving a shit and feeling good is a key starting point to everything. And yes, I do swear, I should have given that. I should have given that warning before I started.
We worked it out.
Yeah. You know me oh too well, Andrew. So does anyone have any questions of me? Or have I scared you all?
No, but I would just like to say that I love your outfit.
Oh, thank you. It took me 45 minutes to choose it this morning, okay?
You chose well.
Thank you. I've got a different outfit for this evening. Variety is always key. Options is always important.
I noticed that you use the term social ability.
Yep.
I'm assuming that that's talking about building up people, or building up yourself, your ability to,
yep.
As a social being, and to connect with other people, you know, in a whole range of different things as well as sexuality. Am I defining it right? Or
yes, you are indeed. The thing is, as a person that does a lot of presentations and teaching, I'm actually quite introverted. Yes, funny that. But it's actually true. And I think a lot of people with disability are. So you actually have to put yourself out there. You actually have to go out. You actually have to make the thing of, I'm here, I'm present. You have to make space for me. And people talk about social spaces. Social spaces need to be accessible. But the only way they're going to be accessible, and I mean accessibility from the point of all inclusivity. I'm not just talking the ramp out the front. Okay? But no, it's true. That's where people stop and think.
At the back of the skip bins.
Yeah, and you have to go around the back or the side entrance. But yeah. But this is the thing. This is the argument that we need to have as a population group, that we need to be sociable. So we argue for social spaces to be accessible. And we actually need to be okay in conflict. And that means asking for something and someone going, I can't do that, it's all too hard. And it's, well, you're legally obliged to, because it's a public space. You know, and so making complaints about making social spaces accessible and inclusive is a key starting point. Because trust me, you're not going to get to the sex if you don't get to the social. It's true.
Take away life. I like it.
Yeah. Thank you. I do try. I work very hard on my presentations. My students will remember bizarre things from classes. But yes. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
I hope I haven't frightened anybody. I hope I have. How many parents of people with disability are in this space right now? Oh God, have I scared you?
Yeah, you scared my mum.
Oh, did I? Oh, that's awesome. The power that I have.
You're a cool parent though, Sarah.
Oh, I'm sure my child would say differently.
But you actually do need to be quite a cool parent to broach sexuality and sexual expression.
Yeah, but you're right. It's much more, about the sociability of it and the pleasure of it, rather than just the physical dynamics of it.
Yeah, because they are going to be different, and you can't tell a person about that.
No, that was a phone.
So there you go.
Denise, the other thing I was going to say as well is that
Julie.
I've actually never dated anyone with a disability.
See, I haven't either.
That's not for any other reason, is that no one has ever asked me out. With a disability, the only average. But the one thing that does irk me a little bit is if you're with someone who's able-bodied and a partner, other people's perceptions.
Oh, that's a fun conversation.
God, they are amazing.
Yeah, they're awesome.
They're like heroes.
I thought that was your support worker.
Yeah.
Oh no, we get. Is that your mum? And
Mine.
I say no, and they say, oh, well, you were her support worker. No.
Yeah, the funny thing is when I go out with my partner, we've gone to a restaurant and a waitress gave him her number.
Yeah.
Right?
I've had that happen.
Yeah.
What did you say? Did you say something?
I said if he takes that number, he won't have any pleasure this evening and a penis to play with. And see, this is the thing, is that this is why representation is so important. Because, and I'm not one for public shows of affection, I'm really not. I'm not extroverted, but representation is important. And a waitress giving a phone number to a partner is just downright wrong.
Like
But-
they're invisible.
Yeah, that's right. But you see, I went to the theatre I went to the ballet the other day, and I went with a long-term friend, actually the creator of Intimate Encounters, Belinda Mason. And we've been friends for 22 years because I'm in that exhibition as the Little Mermaid. And when I go out with anybody, they're like cellophane. And people actually struggle to realise that people with disability are social beings. And we have friends, whether they're people with disability or not. But the assumption is that a lot of the time my partner can be mistaken for my brother, and he goes, oh, that's just really wrong. That's just really wrong. But the thing is, it's because people don't see it. And if they do see it, people automatically assume that you're going out with a person with disability because you are one. So I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying whatever, but you go out with whoever you choose to go out with. But the thing is, representation and being sociable and arguing for that social space is key. Because one of my participants who identified as queer said to me, no social space is accessible to me because my research was national and this person lived in Adelaide. And they were talking about the fact that the gay spaces are all upstairs because of the criminality of the historical criminality of LGBTQI relationships. So we need to argue for accessible spaces. Disability is political, but so is sexuality and sexual expression. We've got to claim that space. You've got to actually claim that space and argue for it. And it doesn't have to be hard.
I think the other problem is that if you do decide to experiment and you are consenting as two consenting adults, if someone else they might be more open to talk about, they go, you can't do that with that person, you're taking advantage of. You go, hang on, I myself consented. What do you mean? I consented. That's all you need to know. There's this perception that people with disabilities, regardless how able or not, shouldn't.
Yeah.
And couldn't give consent.
And see, this is the thing, and I'm not arguing that consent is a contentious issue when there is intellectual capacity relevance, but when there isn't, consent isn't an issue, it just needs to be a discussion had beforehand. And one of my participants identifies as polyamorous. And I'm not saying polyamory, whatever, diversity is great, whatever, you can do whatever. But what she likes about the BDSM space is consent is the first thing spoken about. So maybe we need to actually embrace the topic of consent from sexual diversity and experimentation spaces.
There's also an issue not just about asexuality, claiming that disabled people are asexual. There's also an infantilization
Yeah.
of disabled people where they think because they need to be cared for, they're like children.
Yeah.
So any disabled person, think of them as this asexual little child that if you do anything with them,
The eternal child, my friend. And it doesn't pay to look like, it doesn't pay to look young either. Because unfortunately, I look quite young, and people my age won't speak to me. Because they think that I'm old enough to be they think that I'm the age of their daughter or their son, so they won't speak to me. And it's like, okay.
or also the issue of fetishization of
Yep.
disabled people too. People just assume, oh, you're with that person not because you like them, it's because
Was
they have
that-
a disability.
Yeah. And that came up in the research quite a lot. And some people use fetishization as an outlet, and that's fine. But Fetishization can be a form of violence for other people and they don't like it. So again, the topic of conversation and the topic of diverse conversation, as in diverse sexual expression, is really, really key. It's really, really key. Because for some people, it can be an outlet, but for others, it will be seen as a form of violence because they're only being liked because of a disability attribute. Yeah.
Denise?
Yes?
There's a word I haven't heard you say. I've been waiting for you to bring it up. Attraction.
Attraction.
Because if I'm not attracted to someone,
Yep.
I'm not interested in having a sexual relationship. There's got to be an attraction.
Yeah, there does.
With the male or the female for things to progress, I think.
Yeah.
How do you feel on that?
But attraction only stems from sociability. As in, you can only develop attraction if you see people socially.
Regardless of disability.
Regardless of disability or not. It is very much about sociability and the connectivity. Because you may not connect with a person physically, but you may connect with them intellectually. And for some people, that can be as sexually attractive as the physical act of sex. So it's important that you see, and it's really funny because when I talk about sex, people think that I'm just going to talk about how it all functions. And it's like, I couldn't think of anything worse to talk about. But the thing is, what I find is when I talk about sociability, people actually don't get scared by it. Because everybody needs to actually start from that point. And it could be an attraction. Like my partner, he puts up with me. He's put up with me for now a year and a half.
He accepted you as a person.
No, he tolerates me. He does tolerate me. We have this nice arrangement where he tolerates me because I'm somewhat opinionated for him. But he's a lawyer. And I can tell you, I thought he was dry as all get out until he started talking about what he was interested in. And then we were talking about art, and I found that really interesting. So that's how the conversation started. It didn't start from, oh, that guy looks really interesting and attractive. Trust me, no. Yes, and he knows it. But he can intellectually entertain me, and that for me is a very key thing. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope I haven't scared too many people.